All right, so I have the pleasure of also introducing our next keynote speaker. I've heard him present twice. I'm trying to recall when I met him. It was a couple of years ago. It was here in Chicago. Introducing Andy Kaufman. Andy is a PMP who works with organizations around the world, helping them improve their ability to deliver projects and lead teams. Andy is an international speaker, author, and executive coach, focused on helping people learn how to lead more effectively and deliver more reliably. He is a certified trainer and author of 3 books. Books are the new business cards. I need to write one too. Andy is the host of the People and Projects podcast, which provides interviews and insights to help listeners lead people and deliver projects. Today, Andy is presenting on the executive's role in project success. So everybody please welcome Andy Kaufman.
Thank you, Laszlo. I wish my boss was here. Did you ever find yourself saying that? That would be a no, and I kind of get that, but this is what I mean by that, is I spend most days in-house at companies, and usually the presenting issue is we're struggling with how to lead teams, or we want to get better at delivering projects. And it happens often enough where someone will go, this is helpful, but I wish my boss was here to hear this. She needs to hear this, or he needs to hear this. Maybe there's some elements of today that you feel that way. But I've had the opportunity to meet many of you, but I would actually like to see this with a show of hands to see what kind of bosses we have here, okay? So if you are either by title or by role a team leader, raise your hand, a manager, director, a scrum master, a project manager, product owner, okay? Yeah. So this is why I love being here today, because you're the ones that can make a difference. By the way, if you didn't raise your hands, it's probably because you thought, well, there's a guy named Andy Kaufman on the agenda. It's the dead comedian, right? That's what you were thinking? All right, well, I hate to disappoint you. But we are going to talk about the difference that you make, because the people back in your office are waiting to see what you're going to do. So let's talk about that. If you're a student of the PMBOK Guide, then you know that there's a role that's referred to as sponsor, right? You're familiar with that role. Now, it gets played out in different ways depending on your industry, your company culture, whether you're some flavor of waterfall or some flavor of agile or a hybrid in between that. But whether it's by title or by role, because you have one regardless of whether you know who they are, they're there by role. So what I want you to do is to lean over to the person next to you and answer the question you see up on the screen here. To the best as you understand, what expectations does your organization, so I'm not talking about what the PMBOK Guide says, I'm not talking about in theory, in practice, your organization, what expectations are there for the person who's fulfilling the role of sponsor? Start talking. All right, I'm looking for some examples. Although technically this is a keynote, I like to think of it as just a large panel discussion, and you've been hijacked onto the panel here, okay? So we've got at least 4 microphones going around the room, and I'll grab this one as well. So I'm looking for some examples of what expectations your organization has on your sponsors, okay? Let's get some examples. Yes, all right, yeah. Right here? Yeah.
An enabler, kind of remove barriers.
An enabler, okay? That's a funny word, isn't it? The enable. Then we're talking about in the best sense of being an enabler, right? To be able to make things happen, right? That's cool. All right, what else? Somebody on this side of the room. Yes. Deb.
The person that has the ability to do the 5-minute elevator pitch.
They can do that. So for the project, they have the 5-minute elevator pitch. They go, well, so what is this easy check-in thing or whatever it was called when it first happened? Right now we take it for granted, but back then it's the what is it? And you know, I mean, so many things I've loved about the day so far, but the way you pitch it, like Skip said, can make all the difference on how that pitch goes. Okay? Yeah, and whether they embrace it. Yes. Got a mic right behind you. Oh yeah, well, let's go back by Ryan, then we'll get you.
Sure. Available.
Yeah. So Chris brought this up, right? And one of the leading indicators, I think is how he said it, that what does available mean? Because, I mean, I talk to executives all the time, like, oh yeah, I'm available. You know, walk the floor. I work for an organization. I just want to protect names, all right? But let's say this person's last name was Bothell, so the senior leader. So this would be very similar to the type of role that Chris and the other people are up here. And she fancied herself as very available. And I was talking to somebody, I was new to the company, I'm like, so what's she like, you know? And or what is it? I said the name, and they're like, what's a Bothell? They didn't know what, they thought the last name was something. They didn't know who it was. So, you know, she fancied herself as available, but people didn't know her, right? So available, big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, the sponsor should define success. You know, what does success for this program look like?
Mm-hmm. So that we understand not just hitting a date, right? So we know that it's more than a date, and it ties it to the business. Wasn't that a key message in the panel? That we somehow tie this to the business, which makes perfect sense. Although if you are in this silo of the organization, we often just know that part of the silo, and we don't understand how it spreads. And so being able to have somebody be a voice that, you know, well, this is how it affects here and here and here. And growing up in IT, I started as a software developer. I rarely understood how this really impacted more than about one level of direction away. And once that we did the equivalent of getting on an airplane, and we actually sat with users and then understood it, that made a big difference, right? So the sponsor can help give the picture, maybe provide those opportunities to be able to get out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think the sponsor is responsible for delivering success, and if it's not a very visible project, as long as the success happens, they hope they don't hear much more about it.
Well, you know, in practical terms, right? If everything's going well, I don't need to know about it maybe. But there was a big theme in the panel, I thought, of ownership, and that's an element of ownership. So as was mentioned, they don't have to get down to the task level of delivery, but understand owning it enough so we make sure it gets done, okay? All right, so can I just suggest that regardless of what your title is, regardless of what your role is, regardless of whether you consider yourself a sponsor or not, everyone in this room, based on when you lifted your hand saying that you were a leader, you have just this enormous influence on the success of projects. And I think if I were you, I'd be going like, yeah, that's pretty obvious. But can I just push you a little bit more on that? It's even more enormous than what you think. And that came out in some of the comments that Paul talked about. And in fact, some of the others later talked about this, the critical role of the sponsor. We know it anecdotally, but there's also some good research behind this. On the podcast I host, I had Jim Johnson, the founder of the Standish Group, on interview for episode 116. And this is a comment that he made here based on their research. Can you see this? The number one reason for project failure is poor executive leadership and an unhealthy project environment, which is still back on us. The number one. I think there's all kinds of that I'd rather come up with, right? Failure of technology. It's always good to throw HR under the bus. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could do. But the number one reason of failure, and let's just go with this for the rest of the morning, it's going to be us and what we can do about that. In fact, he goes further on in their chaos report to say this. The number one thing we can do is to get together on a day like this and then to invest in our ability to lead these projects, to be reminded that available is important, but wait a minute, am I really that available in practice? So that's what we're going to focus on here today, is to do this. So how do we influence success? Well, there's lots of different ways we can do it, but I want to abstract it out to these two things that you see up here on the screen. It's the questions that you ask and the actions that you take, okay? So the questions that you ask and the actions that you take. And the reason why I want to focus in particular on this first one is I was taught this by a mentor, that you drive behavior by the questions you ask. Now lock that one in for a second. You drive behavior by the questions you ask. I have a 16-year-old daughter. Anybody a parent of teenagers? Okay. right? It's a fun time of life. And so I've learned, as an example of this, that if I ask her over dinner, hey, got any homework tonight? How's the homework? Look, what do you learn? After a while, she learns Dad's going to ask about the homework, right? By asking the question, it drives the behavior of I better have an answer. We recently adopted 2 kids that were foster kids for us for almost 5 years, and we went from teenagers to like ages 2 and 1. We totally forgot what that was like. But the time of the 2-year-old, when she got to kindergarten age, not big on change at all. Not big on change at all. So one of the things I learned to ask to illustrate this point is, what was great about school today? By asking that question over time, she's like, Dad's going to ask me what was great. And there's plenty of days. I don't want to say this is magical. She didn't go, it was awesome. I mean, it wasn't like that every day. But the point is, we, with our staff, drive behavior by the questions that we ask. And this comes in all kinds of different flavors. One of my favorite guests probably over the last year is a guy named Michael Bungay Stanier. Here's the guy. Wrote a book called The Coaching Habit. And his point about coaching is coaching is actually a lot easier than we make it. And what he says is, you know what? The problem with coaching is too often we just talk too much. Right? In fact, he calls it's cheddar on the mousetrap. Someone comes up and they go, hey, Russ, what do you think about this? And when that happens, he goes, it's cheddar on a mousetrap. Don't you just feel like, oh, I can't wait to answer this. I've been waiting to be able to answer this sort of thing. Right? And he goes, sometimes the best way to coach somebody is this. Is just ask them. Just ask them. He calls it the best coaching in the world. If somebody comes up and go, hey, you know what? Hey, Jim, what should I do here? What you say is, well, what do you think? I mean, what's your take on what we should do here? You drive behavior by the questions asked. If they know you're going to answer it every time, they're going to keep running to mom or dad for you to fix their problems. But his point is, if somebody comes up and goes, hey, well, what do you think we should do here? Well, what do you think the problem is? Say, what's your take on this? Now, you don't do that for the next, 5 weeks. I mean, and his point here is, he calls it the awe question, AWE. And what else? Well, what else? What else? You drive behavior by asking the questions. That gets us to do what Chris was talking about, that critical thinking, to get them to critically think instead of just being off and taking orders. Okay? So that's an example of the questions that we ask. And also, in addition to that, we can say the actions that we would take. There's all kinds of actions that we can take. And there's been some really good ideas that we've already talked about this. But in addition to the actions that we need to take, there's also the issues of the actions that we don't take. And those can be equally as critical and impactful on our projects. Let me give you an example from a book. It's called Decisive from the Heath Brothers. It's one of my favorite books on decision making. And one of the examples they give in the book is somebody who, in their late teens, early 20s, wants to go to Argentina. I think it'd be a cool place to go. But you know what? I just really don't have the money for it right now. And, I've got to finish up school. Well, right after that, I got to pay off the school debt. I got to get a job. I don't have enough vacation. I'll just wait until a little bit later, right? And then it's I got married, and we're trying to get our finances under order. We got kids, but the kids are really too young to appreciate Argentina right now. So what we'll do is we'll kind of wait until they're a little bit older. But then there's ballet, right? There's baseball, there's orchestra. Let's wait until they go to college. But college came to the point where physically she couldn't go because of some health issues. The question is, when did she decide to not go to Argentina? I think you could argue. I think if we had a mic and we put it in front of her, she'd go, I never made that decision. I think we could argue she made that decision every day. And you know what? There's decisions. I got to believe in this room. So many decisions that we've been holding off on making. And it's just another day. It's just another week. And we were like, I know I need to do this with my team. Right? I think it was Chris who said it. We see the status. We fancy it. All right, it's not really red. It's more like pink. It's not red. It's not yellow. And yet we don't take the action. But the interesting thing about action is we take actions for intended consequences, right? As a sponsor, we're going to make this call. We are going to reallocate some of the staff from this project to this project, because this project is not just red, it's got a mushroom cloud over it, right? So we're going to do that. But when we make changes for intended consequences, sometimes what the issue is, though, that there are unintended consequences. One of my favorite podcasts is the Freakonomics podcast, if you're familiar with the series of books. And one of the drums they beat over and over and over on that podcast is that the greatest law of economics, or one of them, is the law of unintended consequences. So we as leaders are going to make decisions with these intended consequences, but almost always those have unintended consequences tied to it. And something that we see all the time from a sponsorship perspective is we're going to make some decisions, but you know what? We take our eye off quality. And so we make these decisions to reallocate staff, but we don't change any of the timelines on the other ones. And there's so many unintended consequences that can happen with projects. Right? So we've got our drive behavior by the questions we ask. There's the actions that we'll take. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Henry Cloud. Another principle I want to kind of get across as we think about this. He actually said it in a book related to marriage. So it was more about relationships. But check out this quote. You get what you tolerate. Okay? Now, I mean, all right, it's not a marriage counseling session here today, but I'm sure there's applicability there. But there's so much applicability for us as leaders with this, that we get what we tolerate. I'm going to call him Sam. Sam was the guy in our company who, year after year, was the ticking time bomb. He got moved from one team to the other, but we couldn't get rid of him because he was so valuable, right? Because of the unique knowledge that he had. Now, I know we've talked about a lot of IT-related content so far today, and for those of you that are non-IT people, you're still welcome here. And this happens outside of IT as well, right? Well, he eventually lands in my part of the organization. And what do you do? What do you do with Sam? Do you just tolerate it? Certainly, you know someone over the course of your career. We tolerated belligerence. We tolerated not adhering to the process because, well, we don't want to tick them off and have them leave. Well, that was the story with Sam. And it got to the point that I did have to let Sam go. And he did leave. And guess how long it took for us to, get over this? Yeah, it was more like 3 days. But we tolerated it for so long. John Maxwell says it slightly different. He says it this way: never complain about what you allow. And leaders, I think if we're honest about this, there's a lot that we're tolerating, and there's a lot that we're allowing that's holding our organizations back. Because remember, this whole day is about how do we improve our ability to deliver. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I would maybe add to the you get what you tolerate to you get what you demonstrate. And the way that you respond to things, the way that we want proactivity of our group. Am I demonstrating proactivity? No. If I'm talking about transparency, how important that is, am I being transparent myself? Right? So with all those things in mind, this is what I want us to do, is I want you to check out this list here. It's one of many different lists of leading causes of failure and success. All right? So if you just look at this list, chances are you recognize some of these items off past projects that have failed. You recognize some on the success side. What I want you to do, just take a minute, lean over to somebody next to you, looking at this and say, what stands out to you? In fact, real quick, just to mention the factors of success, the way those numbers work, is if you have, for example, minimized scope. So you got 10 points next to that one. So if you have minimized scope, you get 10 points. If you have that executive support, you get the 18 points. It's effectively a weighting factor on success, okay? So that's how that one works. So I want you to do is lean over to the person next to you, and what stands out to you in that list? Either surprises you of where it's at, it's higher or lower than what you thought, what seems to be missing from the list overall, right? Just take a minute, have a conversation. Look at that and have a conversation with the people around you. Hey, I'm just interested in a couple examples of what stands out to you. Either surprises you of how high it is, how low it is, that maybe it reinforces a strong bias that you have. What comes to mind? Yeah.
I'm surprised that the denial of risk is at the bottom of the list of failures.
It's a very good observation. As it turns out, the one on the left is not rank ordered. So, that, because that is critical. I'm glad we had that conversation, because that one is the one I see recur so often, and not just in other people, in me. In fact, almost all these are easier to see in other people than ourselves, right? You have a mic from back there?
I just think the formal methodology is kind of low, because if you're not all following the same process and methodology, I mean, your goals aren't all aligned with what the project's going to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look at what's near the bottom on that. Right. We've got the formal methodology, firm basic requirements, reliable estimates. I don't know. The first time I saw this list, well, let's face it, they're not zero, but with a lousy project manager. Actually, take those three, add them up. It still doesn't get up to executive support. That's the point we're trying to make today, is that all these things are good, but if you don't have the person who's going to be available, the person who's going to be able to make the call, to give the guidance, to give the pitch, or does the pitch poorly, right? It doesn't matter if your estimates are good, your project's going to struggle. So I've taken these and just abstracted them into 4 different areas, all right? So and this is where we're going to do some brainstorming together. So if you're roughly on like these 2 sets of tables, roughly over here, you guys are going to be the project management competence like section, okay? You guys here are going to be like the stakeholder management, okay? All right? You guys over here, you're going to be on the scope management brainstorming crew, and on the last part, risk management. If you're not sure, like, which one am I? Don't worry about it, okay? Just decide as a table, all right? But this is what I want you to do. With that designated area of focus, because these are some of the big themes that were on the previous ones, with that designated area of focus, what I want you to do is answer this around your table. What could you be tolerating regarding that section? What could you be tolerating? And that if you were tolerating that in your organization, it's actually impacting your ability to be successful, right? Start that conversation. What is it that you could be tolerating that is actually hurting our projects? Go ahead and get started. All right, let me interrupt you here. Let's get some examples. You know, if there's anything I've learned going cross industry, even cultures, I do all the project management training for the United Nations, and I got to tell you, earlier this week I had 50 people from 4 different continents, and their problems are the same as ours. It's just crazy how this works. And so here's what I want to do. From a project management competence, what are some things that we tolerate? It's kind of a weird way of asking, right? But what are some things that came up in your discussions? Yeah, role clarity.
Tolerate it.
Yeah, we just tolerate that. It's like oh yeah, I know, it's not perfectly clear. You know, it's almost like we just take it as a fact that job descriptions are going to be irrelevant, but let's just take time to do it. And we just tolerate the gap, right? And so we tolerate lack of role clarity. And that is poison on a team, right? Right here.
A lack of professional development.
Right. Yeah. We just I mean, have you ever had this situation? I've run into organizations that do this. Well, we cannot help project managers get certified, because if they get certified, they're going to leave. Have you heard that? Oh my goodness. I mean, can we possibly tolerate an attitude like that? I mean, we'd hate to invest in our people, because then they'd be smart enough to leave. Yeah. But we tolerate mindsets like that. All right. Let's go to the stakeholders, was it? All right. So what do we tolerate with stakeholders? Patricia, thank you for volunteering. Oh, pass it. That was delegation. Good leadership. Yeah.
I guess mine was more on risk then.
You're on the wrong table.
But with the stakeholders, in addition to the regular status reports, I do not tolerate the refusal to participate. So what I'll do is I'll create custom communications directly to them. They're the only ones that it's directed at, and I will list the critical risk that they need to take actions on.
Yeah.
And if in a few days they don't respond, I'm sitting in their office.
Right, yeah, that's good, yeah.
But the critical risks that you talked about, you make it relevant to the individual that you're sending that personal email to as opposed to a corporate risk. So it's more pertinent.
Yeah, that's good. I like how you say it because Dr. Robert Cialdini is one of the foremost researchers on influence, and he goes, the worst place to get mugged, who knows, maybe this is what you need to hear today, but the worst place to get mugged is in a crowd because everyone else is going to assume someone else will call 911 or whatever. But he said if you ever get mugged in a crowd, what you do is you in the blue suit, call 911. They go, okay, right? And the rough equivalent of that is instead of, hey, here's some potential risks, can we look into this? Like, no, that's not the Laszlo way of doing it. It's like, Patricia, here's this risk. I need you to chase this down. And so we get too often we just manage stakeholders like we manage teams, resources, all right? There's resources. They're not resources, right? They're people. And they got unique agendas and stressors and constraints and things like that. So, in fact, Michael Bungay Senior says in that coaching habit, there's magic in using the word you. Not us or we, but you in that case. All right, well, back here. What are some more stakeholder-related ones?
We tolerate how busy they are and therefore unavailable.
Right. Yeah. So in this case, sponsors? Are you talking about stakeholders?
Executives, like your executive sponsor.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's a really good point. And this spans all kinds of things, right? I mean, we get used to working 60-hour weeks or more. And we actually start tolerating that. And, I was taught when I first started my business, and someone comes up, hey, Skip, how's business? What are you supposed to say? Great. You wouldn't believe how busy I am. Haven't spoken in like a month. But you wouldn't believe, right? We make being busy a badge of courage instead of a sign that something's wrong. But we tolerate this to the unintended consequences of our families, and certainly, and that's a huge thing, but also to the team members that we're not spending time with. But we tolerate it, right? So there's a lot regarding this, but we tolerate the lack of availability, the lack of response. And so every once in a while, we'll be working with a project manager. They go, man, it feels like I'm being a babysitter. And I'm like, you're starting to get it now. And what I mean by that is, wouldn't it be like one of my mentors taught me, success in business comes down to the F word, follow-up. It's a very provocative way of saying, listen, when others don't follow up, we're not going to tolerate that. I'm going to follow up, right? That's what we need to do. That's part of it. So many things we talk about with stakeholders. Y'all, scope, right? So what is it that we tolerate with scope that could be hindering our projects? Scope creep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, now the Agile folks in here, what are they saying? That's a good thing. We need to embrace scope creep and all this stuff. And you guys are all so cute, you Agile guys. But and I get that. And actually, I'm just making fun. But the fact is, even within Agile, which radically embraces change, if you've got a product owner that can't make a decision and is just going all over the place, and can't, make their mind up on things, that will end up messing with scope. Yes, sir.
We talked about at the table how scope sometimes there's a lack of a tie-in to the clear business objective or strategic goal, or how it actually produces a business value or benefit, and then the sustainment of that benefit afterwards without continued resource application.
I want to tell you, I think it's a great point, and I have got so much blood on my hands of this growing up as a software developer, because it was like a feature or as a task, and we didn't really think about what was the impact of this, how is it aligned. We really didn't think of it as an investment. We just thought of it as work. It was task. And that's a big thing that we can do as leaders, is help people understand not only this is where we're going, but this is the why we're going there, and making sure that's really clear so we can see the impacts. Mm-hmm. Now let's take one more from the scope perspective. Or, yeah. Right. So there's not enough scope, or it's not a, there's so many different aspects that we just kind of tolerate. You know what, another scope thing we tolerate is shove as much scope in there because we know we're going to de-scope it later. And it turns into this weird dysfunction about that. And then kind of in the spirit, not exactly what Deb was saying, but then we end up delivering something that we promised this, but we deliver, we promised to solve world hunger, we deliver a peanut butter sandwich. But let's claim victory. All right, that's an easy thing to do. All right, the risk crew. What do we tolerate? Yes. Ironic that happened with risk, yeah.
Oh. All right. So one quick thing I wanted to mention to piggyback off your earlier comment. What if we invest in our people and help get them certified and they leave? But then you have to think about what if you don't invest in people and they stay?
Right.
Nothing changes.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So it's the, so what do we tolerate regarding risk? We maybe dismiss it. We don't think of the other sort of, like, we think of, well, what's the risk of doing this? But we don't think of what's the risk of not doing this. Can be something, yeah. All right, what else? What else do we tolerate regarding risk? I should grab my mic over here. There you go.
Thank you. We tolerate it's one and done. I have one conversation, and, well, the risk is done. It's handled.
Yeah, that's a great one. Because in the PMI guide, it's just done during planning, so you just fill in the box so your matrix is filled out, then you just go forward, right? A lot of times we think of risk identification as something you just do during planning, and we don't think about the control risks that's done along the way. It's a very easy thing to miss. Right? Honestly, we could spend a lot more time on the tolerations, but I think it was Chris, or maybe it was Paul who said it. We need to be solutions focused, not just problems focused, right? So here's what I want you to do. In those same categories, I want you to do this. To improve outcomes in your designated area here, what are some questions that you could ask to drive the behavior that you're really looking for? And do you have any personal favorite actions that you've learned to take that when it comes to managing my stakeholders, I've learned if I take this action, this helps me manage my stakeholders better. If I take these actions, it helps me manage my risks better, okay? So start a conversation on that. I'll interrupt you in a bit, and we'll do some more of our giant panel discussion here, okay? So go ahead, start. All right, let me interrupt you here. We're looking for some examples of questions you can ask to drive the behavior that you're looking to get, or actions that you can take that will positively influence the teams, the projects under you, okay? So let's start over on the project management competence. What are some questions you could ask or some actions that you can take that's going to improve our overall project management competence? We're going to do projects better overall. What would you say? Yes.
So our group here talked about some things we tolerate are delays in schedules, and some things that we can do, questions we would ask would be all around communication. Have a daily team huddle, look for, how's it going today? What do we need to accomplish? Are there blockers that have been identified? Who owns resolving it? Right. And just have that cadence going.
Right, having that regular cadence. Yep. Absolutely. And not having it just be, what's your stoplight color? Right? Or what's your percent complete? Right? Is that like a lousy way to measure it? If I've got a 4-week task assigned to me and I'm 2 weeks into it and I haven't touched it, what's my percent complete? 90. We're learning more about you all the time, Ellen. A lot of people are going to tell you 50. A lot of people, they're going to tell you 50, and they're hoping, they're praying that the big ramp up at the end is going to save them, okay? And so asking more intentional questions than than just the status. Taking to heart the comments that were made about the kind of the preemptive KPIs and asking questions more related to the leading indicators, because percent complete would certainly be trailing. All right, so what else? What else comes to mind? Question you can ask or action you can take.
So since I work with teams of engineers, and I'm not IT,
Yeah.
we had actually a very good discussion about that at this table, how different it is.
Right.
I oftentimes find I have to ask the guys what comes first.
Yeah.
To get them to organize their thought processes, because I think everyone's just trying to do everything at once.
That's good. Yeah. That's actually a question in Michael Bungay-Stanier's book there, the coaching question. From your perspective, what is the real issue here? What should we do first? Because a lot of times the people closest to the work know that. But we talk too much and don't ask enough questions, is what he would say. By the way, he also says in the book, and the thing is, our advice, it really isn't that good. Like we think it is, but it's not nearly as brilliant as what we think it is. And so his point is, ask the question, what comes first? Instead of you faking it, right? Or instead of you pretending, right? What else comes to mind?
One of the actions you can take or need to take is drill into what is the real business problem and the real solution, not necessarily the assumed solution.
Right. Yep. It's very easy to make some assumptions there, and I mean that addresses the scope. Actually, a lot of this affects all of these for sure. But you know, a question that I like to ask in this case is, what is it that we're not doing because of a constraint? What is it that we're really skipping because you feel the heat of the deadline? And just imagine, I mean, how many times have you had a boss where you're like, all they want me to do is hit the date. That's all they want me to do. Even though we talk about success criteria, all they really know about is the date. And so if you're like, what is it that you really think we ought to be doing, but we're not because we're feeling pressure on time and money? And that might yield something. You know, another question, what have you personally been learning lately about delivering projects? You ask the question, it drives behavior. It's a little bit variation of the school bus question when you get off, but on a somewhat regular basis. If one of your project managers goes off from training, what are some of the lessons you learned? What do you think we could do here? Because that makes them think, they're like, man, I go to this training, I know that I'm going to be asked about that, so it'll drive the behavior. They're going to take notes. It's not just a trip and training. On the stakeholder management, actions to take, questions that you could ask. Some of these are questions we could ask ourselves, for sure. Like the one I believe it was Chris who said it is, how long has it been since I've touched base with the sponsor? Or if you are the sponsor, how long has it been since I've touched base with the team? And if it's more than a week, that could be a sign there. Right? So a question or an action? Yeah, Brian.
So one question for stakeholder management, we were talking more about the user community, just asking them how they think the project's going.
Right. Yeah.
Or if they feel that's a little too confrontational or that you have a hidden agenda, ask how's your manager or your director, your VP think the project's going.
Yeah.
Because then that'll just tease out whether they're satisfied, because they're the ones that own the result when you move on to the next project.
Yeah, and let's say they go, because especially if you have some clout in the organization, hey, how's the project going from your perspective? They're like, it's great. You know, it's great. One guy told me at their company, it's manure. It's how do you say it? It's manure down here, but it's fertilizer up here. Yeah. And there is some research that I think is pretty intriguing that the bigger the gap in power, the more optimistic they're going to answer that question. So you might be straight with your direct boss, but the bigger the gap in power, so keep that in mind as you get more and more responsibility. People are going to go around telling you it's all good. And so maybe finding a variation of the question, which I think is a great question, but a variation of the question might be, what's keeping you awake at night about this project? You know, what is it that you really wish you could tell me, but no one's told me this yet? You know, that might, like you said, Brian, tease out something that is kind of they feel like they want to say it, but they maybe don't feel free enough to say it? What's another either question or action you could take to manage your stakeholders? Mm-hmm. We haven't heard from you for a bit.
As you know, there's two types of stakeholders, the designated ones and the undesignated ones.
Yeah, right.
I think you can earn an awful lot by going down to the undesignated stakeholder, just like putting the team or the customers on a plane and flying all over the world and what have you, going down and saying, okay, how do you perceive this project? What could you make recommendations for? It's like the mechanic on the line that has to grind parts day in, day out, and he stuck his finger where it shouldn't have been and what have you. He can tell you firsthand what he has to do to make it better. And I think that that's an action that I think all project managers should do. They should walk the floor or walk the customer's viewpoint. It's just jumping over here. So.
It's a little bit of the undercover boss idea, isn't it? It's the get out of the tower, and let's face it, we all feel like we're so busy, and intellectually we're all like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. But it is, I'm tolerating not doing that. So how long has it been since I've been on the plane? Or how long has it been since I've talked to the person on the shop floor? And it's amazing what you can learn. I love PMI's definition, the PMI guide definition of stakeholder. It's not just the actively involved people. It's who is it we're affecting, and it's almost always more than we realize. Who is it that could affect us? So a question might be, who's against this project? Who is it that really doesn't like this project? Isn't that helpful to know? But kind of to your point, there's actually this broader part of the definition. Who is it that perceives that they're impacted? They're not, but they're still freaking out. Right? And to think more holistically about that. So actions can be taken of like talking to your project manager of like, hey, are there any stakeholders that you just feel like they're really struggling over this? Or they're really just dragging their feet? Are there some people, do you need something from me to go kind of, my dad would say, grease the skids? Do you need me to go talk to them? Do you need me to present at your next meeting? But it's asking those questions because sometimes project managers are stuck right here, where this stakeholder says zig and this one says zag, and they don't have the clout, but you do. You might be able to go in there and actually help them through that. Yeah, Laszlo. Okay, got it.
So before I present the question, to your point about the other stakeholders, and there was a comment at our table as well, I assign what I call drag coefficients to certain people who may not necessarily be stakeholders, or they could be, or they're outside the projects and they create a drag on the project. And some have more influence than others. But then the question that I ask after carefully researching and approaching the sponsor is, are you the right sponsor for this project? Because you don't seem to be engaged.
I like how Laszlo rolls. Yeah. You know what? Sometimes having difficult conversations is a big part of this. It's like the difference between cognitive and affective conflict. Cognitive conflict is, listen, we need to have this good discussion. It's not disrespectful, it's not mean, it's not rude. It's just, we need you here more often. Okay, so that's maybe an action that they take. If maybe people are afraid to do that, though, so we take the action of, listen, what is it that I'm not doing but you need me to do? That's a good question for us as leaders to be asking our team members. What do you need from me that I haven't been doing? Because that really opens it up. If you go, hey, do you need anything from me? No, just keep being your lame self. You know, that might be what they're saying. Let's hit on the scope. Actions you like to take, questions you can ask. Did it come up on anything like, is this absolutely required? That's a big question. It's very easy to get the nice to haves instead of just the must to haves. Must haves? Yeah, Steve?
The big one was, what does done look like?
Yeah, what does done look like? That's so good. Yeah, what is done? What is done? An action that I think I didn't take enough time thinking of before is what's in scope, but I didn't take enough time of like, let's make sure we get clarity of what's not in scope. Because sometimes for people to understand what's in, it's helpful for them to know what's not in. And so any questions you can ask to drill in, is that absolutely required? Is it absolutely required now? What is this minimum product that if we get this in, you know, and as much as I kind of made fun of the Agile people before, there's so many aspects about it that I absolutely love. It's like, let's deliver this. We're going to learn from that. And so keeping scope as minimal as possible. Is that absolutely required, or could we do that in a later phase or iteration? Okay. And for time, we're going to go to risk. Yes?
Validating the assumptions that were used to drive the ROI of the project.
Right, yeah.
You often will look at risks and assumptions around the solution,
Yeah.
but not what will drive the ROI.
Right.
Through the course of the project, you may need to course correct because the assumed ROI will no longer be there.
Right. So when it comes to a question we get asked, if somebody, I get worried about stuff. But is this something that's a priority enough for us to worry about, or is this something that's not affecting ROI? But trying to understand the difference in the risks. I think it was Henry Kissinger who said if the average American really knew what was going on at night, if the average American really knew what was going on in the world, we wouldn't be able to sleep at night. And I think some of our project managers are like that. They're freaked out over so many things. And one of the things that we can do is try, listen, you're right, there is a lot to be worried about. I'm not going to resist that resistance. I'm just going to say, you're right, that there is a lot to worry about. Now, let's talk about what's the most important stuff we ought to be worried about. Now, what was your thought?
Yeah, actually, that's a good segue. We talked about actions that you could take in risk management, and one of the key things is to assess the risks. And by that, I mean a lot of teams just start and stop with identification and have the laundry list of all these risks that are kind of vague.
Right.
You really need to get to the level of assessing what's the probability, what's the potential impact, and then you can be much more action-oriented towards mitigation.
Right.
Prioritize them.
There you go. A question that I've just learned to ask is every status meeting, what are your top 3 risks? What are your top 3 risks? Now, there's nothing magic about 3. It might be 5. It might just be what are your top risks. But if you ask that simple question, it will drive the behavior of they're like, he's going to ask me about risks. I better have an answer. He doesn't want just happy talk here. Okay? There's like so much wisdom in this room that I wish we had more time to tap into. Let me just say this. Over the course of this morning, there's a lot we've talked about, right? We started with Skip with that very excellent keynote on things like embrace the change, because if we resist the resistance, that is just going to embed. Isn't that a good message for us? We're remembering things like, can we find a way to embed it or to give the vision or to help by how we pitch it, how we tell the story? So many things from the panel discussion that I personally took away, especially on the preemptive KPIs, being more proactive. How about that theme of ownership that came out of that? That was so helpful. Could we just give one more time of Skip and the panel here? Nice. I mean, it's just very, very well done. The message I'm just trying to give is that everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think intuitively we know this, but you're like, but you don't know my boss. You don't know our company culture. You don't know, and we can keep going to that, and you're right, I don't know. But this is what I do know, to paraphrase a former defense secretary. You do not go to war with the army that you wish you had or that you want to have. You go to war with the army that you have. So I'm going to end with this, 2 things. 1, if you are not a member of this chapter, can I just tell you, we exist to help you not go to war alone. If you're not a member or a regular attender, I gotta tell you, change that, because this is a group of people that you can share lessons. You can help each other out, okay? So I wanna make sure you understand that. And secondly, there's a guy named Dan Rust who wrote a book called Workplace Poker. And it's probably my favorite book on office politics over the last year or so. And the most difficult chapter in the book is on personal responsibility. And this is basically what he says. If you don't like the status of your projects, if you don't like the relationship you have with your boss or your stakeholders, if you don't like how scope is being managed or risks or whatever, he's like, you really only have one person to blame. You and I only have one person to blame, and that's ourselves. It's that radical ownership. And it's a bitter pill to swallow, because I think we could say it's not fair, but he goes, it's like the chess player 30 minutes into the game, and like, I don't like the noise in this room. Or I don't like what the board looks like. My hand was on every step of the way. And this is what I mean by all this is, you know what? You don't have the perfect boss. You do probably have a somewhat screwed up culture. and you probably have team members that you inherited, but you do have enormous impact on the success of your projects. And if I could encourage you to do anything from today, that is ask more, tell less. All right? Ask, what are the questions I can do to drive behavior? What can I be a little bit more intentional of the actions that I take? Remembering there are intended consequences and unintended consequences. Remember that you're getting what you're tolerating. Take that serious. There's stuff you're allowing that you need to stop doing that. And maybe this is the reminder that you need. You and I have this incredible privilege to lead. Let's leave this place and do that. Thanks.
It's coming. There we go. All right, we're going to wrap this up with the raffle, but a few closing thoughts and announcements. First of all, thank you for joining us today. The most successful part of a conference is you and your participation, and then taking away what we have and using it in your workplace and in your daily lives. We would also like to thank, first of all, Andy, great job summing up the whole conference. You've done my job for me, so thank you. Really appreciate it. But another round of applause for Skip, Andy, Deborah, Paul, Chris, Phil, and Amy. Thank you very much. All right. So the PMI Chicagoland chapter and the Executive Council is delighted to bring you and bring to a close the 12th annual conference. We are celebrating our 40th year as a chapter. It's a round of congratulations for us. With that, we have 4,600 members, and we are the 5th largest chapter in the world. How's that? Awesome. So if you are not a member of PMI Chicagoland, go to pmichicagoland.org. We changed our website recently so that dash is gone. That dash always annoyed me. Extra typing. So big round of applause and thank you. Also, mark your calendars. 2017 PM Symposium on September 15th in Rolling Meadows. And Amy, it's been a long time since we had the Congress here in Chicago, hasn't it?
It's been 20 years.
Wow.
20 years.
So October, mark your calendars, for 26th through 28th is the Leadership Institute meetings.
That's right.
And the conference itself is the 28th through 30th in October at McCormick Place. All right. Great recap again on SCIP and championship culture, so thank you very much. Our panelists shared the insights. Again, ownership. Oh my goodness. You as the PM own the project and you own the business results from that. All right, I hope to see each and every one of you. Take a piece of the wisdom home with you. And before you leave, make sure you get the raffle thing in because it's probably closed by now.
Last call.
Last call?
Run down here. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Laszlo. So before we go to the raffle, I just want to present, Laszlo went and put a lot of effort into making sure we had a great facilitated event. So I just wanted to say thank you. He will frame this and put this on his desk wall, I'm sure, but thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. One more reminder. Who in here has some sort of PMI certification? PMP, PGM? Okay, you're probably all wondering, I want my 3 PDUs, don't you? You know what? We're going to do it for you. This great and amazing team of volunteers that are brilliantly displayed in red shirts have made this possible. This entire event would not have been anywhere close to where it is today without these amazing leaders. So I just want to do a quick round of applause for all the volunteers. You know, we get paid a lot of money to do this. I've got like a 6-figure salary of zeros. We all did this with our personal time away from our families, and we all have day jobs. And so, and you know what? And we choose to do it because of the great community that this chapter has here. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I'm going to do it for another 10. I think it's just a great organization.